Hello and welcome to this demonstration of Mudbox. My name is Jonas Törnqvist and I've been working in the film and game industry as a character and creature artist for almost 12 years now. I worked and freelanced for companies such as Lionhead, Blur, Framestore, and I'm currently working at a game company called DICE here in my hometown of Stockholm. I've been using Mudbox since the beta version of Mudbox version 1, and it has become an irreplaceable part of my toolset. In this presentation I will focus on some of the texture painting features of Mudbox, some of the features that I use quite a lot myself, and I hope you will find it interesting. As you can see here, this is the model that we're going to be using for this presentation, and this scene is made out of several objects with different shaders and textures applied to them. There's a total of 6 2K textures in this scene. Some objects, like the body here, is made out of several UV tiles. So we have one UV tile for the body and a second UV tile for the head here, which is a great way of getting a lot of texture resolution. We're going to start by having a look at his hand over here, and the way I usually start when texturing an object like this is by using reference images, project them on top of my geometry. I will give you a great sort of starting point later on when you go in and manually add details to these textures. So the way I do this in Mudbox is that I load in a matching stencil. So now I'm going to load in a stencil of the top of the hand here. And I didn't use this stencil as a reference when I modeled this hand, so as you see they don't quite line up. It's not too bad, but you know, they won't match up 100%. So what we do is we rotate and scale it to roughly match up with our geometry. And once we're happy with that, we're going to go and add a sculpt layer to our geometry. And now we can use the sculpt tools in Mudbox to sort of position our geometry to match this stencil image. There's another way of doing this by sort of deforming your texture to match your geometry instead, but I find this way to be a lot quicker and the results to be a lot better. Now, the more time you spend on this, obviously the better results you will end up with, but for this presentation we're just going to be do a bit of a rush job. But the most important thing is to get sort of the outline and the fingernails and knuckles to line up. And once that's done, we're just going to go and select the projection brush and then project this stencil on top of the geometry. So that's a pretty good match. So we're just going to go and select the projection brush here. And one thing to remember is that in Mudbox, when you project a texture like this, you're not projecting in screen space, but rather in the resolution of your stencil. So even though the hand is not very big in screen space, we will get a really high quality projection because we have a very high resolution stencil. So then this is done, we're just going to project everything. You can obviously just project a part of the stencil onto geometry. Let's have a look at from another camera angle and see. As you can see, it's done a really good job, and we have quite a high resolution texture to start working on. We do get some artifacts here at the seam, but since we have this as a separate paint layer, we can just easily go and erase the parts that we're not happy with. And I'm gonna show another nice feature of Mudbox 2011, and that's the layer blend modes. I'm going to choose a overlay blend layer, and they work just like the overlay blend layer works in Photoshop, which means if we have a white color and paint in a dark area here, we're going to sort of light up those dark areas. And by holding down Control, we will invert the effect, so we will paint in with a darker color, and we can, you know, bring down some of the highlights. And the reason we do this is that when we created this image, we got a lot of shading information from the photograph, and we don't want that, not too much anyway. So we're going to sort of remove this shading information from the texture, sort of flattening out the texture. You can do this before you project your texture, obviously, but I think it's pretty nice to see it in real time like this. Really quickly we added a good starting point, a good projection, and we removed a lot of the lighting information. But let's have a look at another object here, the tank top. So let's add a logo to this tank top. We'll do this just the same way we used projection on the hand. So we're going to create a new paint layer and then just load in the logo that we want to project and position it where we want. And then we're going to just use the normal paintbrush in the white color to project this logo onto the tank top. And as you can see, this works great. We get a perfect projection from screen space. But as you can see, the logo is not deforming with the cloth. The cloth is a bit twisted, but the logo is just perfectly straight. So we're going to go into the flatten UV space instead. And as you can see here in the UV, the logo is twisted to compensate for the cloth being twisted in the 3D view. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to project this logo onto the cloth in this flatten mode. So it's going to be perfect projection in here in the flatten view, but when we go back into the 3D space, you're going to see that the logo deforms with the cloth, so you get a more natural look. As you can see here, if you turn on the wireframe, you'll see that it follows the deformation of the cloth in a more natural way. Now there's other really useful ways that you can use this flatten to UV mode. For example, let's say we want to add some stitches to the collar area, the seam area here. To do this in the 3D view, it would be really complicated because of the round shape. But since we have flattened out the UVs here into this straight stripe, UV stripe, it's really easy to just turn on tile on our stencil and pick a grayish color and just go and stencil it in like this. So since it's a really simple shape here in the UV view, it's a lot simpler to add these sort of details. As you can see here, it follows the color, the seam perfectly in 3D space. Well, almost perfectly anyway. Let's have a look at some of the other texture types that you can paint here in Mudbox. I'm going to start by adding a glossiness texture channel. We're going to leave the glossiness at 1K because we don't really need more resolution than that. Remember that it will create two 1K textures, so one for the body and one from the head, since we're using multiple UV tiles on this object. I prefer using the glossiness instead of of specular strength channel. The more glossy a part of the object is, the stronger the specular anyway, so you don't really need to paint a specular strength map, although sometimes it could be very useful also. It's really a good way to bring out some of the surface details here around the eye, and it's great to be able to paint this in real time. It's one of those property textures that is really hard to paint in a 2D package like Photoshop, because you don't really know what it's going to look like in movement and in different lighting conditions. And in Mudbox you can have a look at the diffuse texture together with the glossiness, and also with your high resolution geometry. Now another really powerful thing is obviously the bump mapping. So I'm going to create a bump channel here. We're going to use 2K for this because it's you're going to need more resolution for a good bump effect. Now I usually just use 0.1 in the bump depth on the material, otherwise you'll get too extreme bump effect. And then I prefer using the stencil to sort of, and I have different stencils of different parts of skin, like pores and different sort of organic textures, just break up my strokes. As you can see here, it's really easy to add some nice detail. I don't like to do this sort of pore detail with the displacement. I prefer doing it in a bump channel instead. It's a lot easier to back in your main package when you're rendering. Trying to get this sort of resolution out of displacement can take, it can increase render times quite a lot. I'm just going to add some nice little details to the lip. And the great thing here is you can see it working together with the glossiness and how you break up the specular on the lips with this bump. And this sort of thing is also really hard to paint in a 2D application, because they all sort of work together. The bump needs to work with your displacement and also together with your specular maps. And it's really hard to do that in a 2D application. As you can see, we really quickly just added quite a lot of nice details to this model. I'm going to create a new layer for the diffuse also. And as I said, and as I showed before, I usually start by projecting different textures, and that gives you a great start for your texturing, but you still need to tie all these projections together, so there's still a lot of manual painting once the projection phase is done. And as I mentioned before, I like to use stencils for that. You can use stamp textures for your brushes in Mudbox too, but I still prefer using the stencils because you have a lot more control over the sort of the scale and the position and the rotation of the texture that you're projecting onto your model. So here you can see I'm sort of painting away some highlights and just giving a more even look to the texture. Another great thing is if we hide this tank top here, as I mentioned before, we have two UV tiles for this object. So there's one UV tile for the head and one for the body. And as you can see here, we have a nasty seam where those UV tiles meet up. And this is another really powerful way to use Mudbox, to just pick colors on each side, and then by just using a stencil like this, quickly just paint over the seam. It's also worth mentioning that The head has a lot higher texture resolution than the body, and there's also some quite bad UV with a lot of pinching and stretching in this neck area. But as you can see, Mudbox has no problem whatsoever creating a good result, even though you have those sort of limitations. So I'm just picking different brighter and darker colors on both the head and the body, and then just tying them together. You can also go and switch back and forward through this self-illuminated and shaded mode. I mostly like to paint in the self-illuminated, no shading mode, but it's great obviously to get this sort of, to better see the model and see where you're going to place your painting in the shaded mode. Another great tool in Mudbox is the stamp tool. As you can see here, sometimes happens the nipple. The texture of the nipple doesn't really quite match up with the model. It's really simple to just pick your sample area and then clone, just like you do in Photoshop or other 2D packages. As you can see, really quickly we just fix that little error. You can see the same thing with the belly button here. And this, once again, just pick the area where you want to sample and then clone. And do the same thing, just remove the old belly button here. So this is also a very powerful tool and works perfectly, if you want to clone over scenes, for example. And you just get that stencil back and then just pick some colors and just blend the little scene that we got here. Just paint it away. So at this point we probably have 10 2K textures and a couple of 1K textures, all displaying diffuse, gloss and bump value in real time in the viewport. And this is a great time saver. Instead of having to do your texture in Photoshop and then go back to your 3D package and do a test render just to see what the gloss or the bump looks like. So I hope you learned something from this presentation, and I hope you give Mudbox a try in the future.